Welcome to The Bold Blueprint, a podcast for modern educators who dare to think differently. Here we explore the intersection of education and leadership, diving into bold strategies, innovative teaching, and the mindset shifts that drive real impact. Whether you're in the classroom, leading a team, or shaping the future of education, this is your space to learn, grow, and lead with confidence. All right, Barbi, I can't believe we're in double digits of our podcast already. What a journey.
I haven't actually kept track of the number, I must admit. Yeah, no, that's good.
I know. And I heard that you might. How are you doing?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, fine, fine. Yeah,
Children, okay?
yeah.
Were they sick last
Oh,
week?
no, but I've got one going through night terrors, which is new to me.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, it's very, very weird going through it, and yeah, that's a whole other story. Yeah, on that side, how are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm actually personally excited for today's podcast, and this is a person who is very near and dear to my heart. And if we go back to our first episode of our podcast, Barbie, I did kind of share some of my story, and you shared some of your story, and the why, and everything that we do that drives us as human beings, and the purpose of why we're doing this podcast is about inspiring across Australia with a different sector educators, centre leaders, and even other people who've come in. And I think, Barbie, what's important to me is that there are some special people throughout our lives that come in and out of our lives that can really leave a bit of inspiration. And, you know, even in the dark times, not really knowing where you're going down a pathway, that there sometimes is someone who's carrying a torch. And Narelle Gurney is today coming onto our podcast. And for me personally, Narelle was that person and continues to be that source of inspiration. But not just from a personal lens to have Narelle on today's podcast, but also Narelle has worked and continues to work with the Salvation Army and spent a lengthy amount of time in Malawi and worked with a lot of with a country that is so stricken with poverty and being able to support children in another country. So, Narelle, welcome. I think I hopefully I introduced you in a way that I'm explaining well, but I'm a bit nervous to say hello to you. But we're so excited to have you here.
Thank you, Jamie, and I am too. And it was lovely to hear you say that I'm near and dear to you, but I do think it was my dog at the time that was the draw card for you.
Okay, so we've got to tell our listeners and to you, Barbie. It's actually really fun. What Narelle is talking about. So
Mm.
so Narelle and myself actually came into contact with each other. Narelle, do you want to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I was working for an organisation called Stretch a Family, which is a bit of a corny name, but basically it was a place for teenagers who couldn't live at home, and they would come to us and we would sort of work alongside of them to find out what would be the best future for them, either foster care or residential care or whatever it might be. And Jamie came to that place, and I was asked to be his caseworker by the boss, which was just wonderful because he became very dear to me as well. And I used to take my golden retriever, Kimber, to work, and they had the same colour hair, and there was a draw card. And Jamie and Kimber got on very, very well. In fact, I don't know if you want me to say this, but
Of course.
Jamie actually married Kimber without my consent or knowledge, and became for a time my son-in-law until he moved on.
So, Barbie, to explain that a little bit for the listeners. So, Stretch Family is a refuge. So, this crisis care, short term and long term care for young people who may not live at home, especially for people who are ward of the state. In the states, New South Wales is where I was a ward of the state, and that's where the department was called DOC in those days. Appointed myself to, you know, be at Stretch Family, and there was a whole process there. And
Mm.
I can only imagine what life was like, you know, as a young person. Looking back, I think I was a different version of myself as compared to now, as you would be as a teenager. But I think Kimber, and I think the reason why I'm a dog person is I think therapy dogs is a real thing. Like I think even for myself, now with two dogs, in times where it can be tough, dogs I think give you a lot of joy in your life. And Kimber was, I don't know, I think Kimber and me had a real special connection. And wherever I was, Kimber followed me. And I do remember that one day in the refuge stretcher family, um, we got like a veil and everything, and the youth worker at the time was the pretend pastor, and we had a pretend wedding. I love that dog so much.
Yeah, and look, all jokes aside, Kimber was a great asset to that place because it was a place where young people couldn't have their own animals because it was short term and we didn't know where they were going. And so the boss allowed me to bring this dog in from when she was 7, 8 weeks old, and she played a real part. And I remember, I don't know if you do, Jamie, but I remember clearly some of our most significant conversations would happen when you were helping me to bath her. And I would say to the boss during the day, "Oh, I'm going to bath Kimber with Jamie this afternoon," because that's when you would chat. We weren't focused on each other, looking at each other. We were focused on the dog, and you would talk more freely. So, yeah, it was actually a great benefit to have uh, you so much connected to that dog. Yeah.
I'm a bit emotional about that.
I know.
Well, thanks for
Aw.
sharing. Yeah. Yeah, so thanks.
Sorry, Jamie.
Sorry, that's a really special memory, and I agree. Like life was quite hard, and
Yeah, it was.
I think it wasn't easy. And I did go down the foster care route, and that wasn't a great experience.
No,
But I do think I am the person I am today, Narelle, because of you, and it's so exciting to have you here today. And I've also
thank you.
spoken about Miss Conti in this podcast as well, my drama teacher at high school, and you know that both you and Miss Conti both helped me to think about wanting to go into the care sector and early childhood education. And I can't believe I'm sitting here in front of you,
Yeah.
and hopefully, there's a little bit of a proud moment. I get to share my story with you where I'm at now as a 45-year-old.
Mm, mm,
Um,
yeah. Well, I'm enormously proud of you, Jamie, because I just, I know what it was like for you a little bit, and what it was like for you when you're a teenager, and it was difficult for a lot of reasons. It's difficult for any teenager to come to a place like Stretcher Family, and living with other kids that you don't know and you don't choose to be there, and then going to foster care at an age where young people are naturally pulling away from parental figures and looking at their own independence and their own autonomy. And yet at this age, we introduce them to a family, as we did with Jamie, and, expect this some sort of connection and bond to happen, which is quite different to the biological process, I guess. So it was a difficult time because of that. And just living with people that, as I said, you don't know, and not knowing what your future was. And I just think, Jamie, you're an enormously resilient and strong person. And I don't think you realise. I absolutely know that you did not realise that at the time, but I think you do now. And it became more and more evident as you got older, and the things that you went through, and just kept on coming back, just kept on standing up. And yeah, we had some fun times. We had some good laughs as well.
that is true. That is true. Sorry, Barbie. It's like a
Don't be my I especially obviously very different situations, but still parallel or similar. I
Yeah.
fully understand. And then say I take notes. I'm a typer and a writer. Like one of the things I noted down was just Narelle's face when she saw you before Jamie. Like it was before it was recorded so other people won't get to see. I think I noted down like that was pure joy. Like it was actually a face of pure joy, like a kid at a chocolate store or a shop. And just that, like, oh yeah, not admiration but joy. And I
Yeah.
think it's also a joy. I could be, but from where you are now too, like seeing like who you are and who you've become.
Uh,
We can just rename this podcast "How Awesome Jamie Is."
yeah,
He
we can, because I
he
can
won't
say
let us.
about that.
no. I mean,
He won't let us.
And this podcast is not about that. This
I
podcast is
know.
about hearing other people in our world that come in our
And
life that can help make a difference and kind of get to a place where you could go this way, you could go that way, and there are people who help you kind of guide you in a way that you can go. And I have to tell you, some of the children and young people that I lived with didn't go down the same pathway I did.
yeah,
And I don't know why people ask that question, like what drove you and what made you be wake up every morning. And I genuinely feel it was about finding a sector and an industry that I was so passionate by, because everything out of my life was so chaotic and so crazy. And when you turn 18, and yes, Stretcher Family had a program where after you turn 18, there was still support, but I still had to get my traineeship, pay my rent, find my way through life without any kind of financial help or any kind of interaction with my family at all. And I think what really got me through that is being able to show up for children every single day and try and get the best outcome for them. And shared in my a couple of podcasts ago that in that first year being a trainee, certificate 3, it wasn't known as Jamie. It was known as I wasn't known as Jamie. I was known as the trainee, getting $5.25 per hour. And I really felt it was a calling to do something that was bigger than myself. And Narelle, you helped me see a bit of that perspective as I was going through some lost times. But there was definitely some people through the years in my teenage life living in refuges and other places where, if you think about King's Cross days back in the day, that's where they were hanging out and, doing things that may not be, within the law, but still trying to navigate their way and how they
Yes.
living with their experience. And I think I still have a connection with some of those people that I lived with at those times,
Yeah.
and there will always be that bond.
I think and I think this is probably relevant to your listeners as early educators, that young people, children and young people, and I differentiate that, teenagers, need significant people in their lives. And often they are a parent or parents or grandparents, but often they are people outside of the family, and that's necessary for a number of young people and children. And I think one of the benefits for you, Jamie, I'd be interested in your comment on this, was that you were with that organisation, Stretcher Family, for a very long time, because I think you were about 13 or when you came to us.
Yep,
Yeah.
13.
And you went through a certain program, the short-term place and foster care, and then you went into our long-term, what we called a transition to independent living skills until you were about 18ish or
Yep.
something. So you were there for a long time, and in combination with that, the then CEO of the organisation, Lillian, had been all up. She was there for 20 years. I was there for 15, and another worker who I think you had, Lorena, she
Loretta.
was there for a very long time as well, probably 15 years or more, I don't know. And so there was some stability in the adults in your life. And you mentioned a school teacher as well, and maybe there were, and also I remember you had some really close friends. I think Kerry was her name.
Yep.
Yeah. And I remember thinking that over years that you've kept this friendship for a long time. And so those long-term relationships, the stable relationships, I think help young people to have some resilience in their life, and you certainly have that in spades. Um, so I think it was a combination of things. It was a good workplace for those of us who worked there because of Lillian's leadership, and that enabled us to stay for a long period and see young people through. And I guess I say that because I think of teachers, early childhood teachers, teachers who have enormous impact on young people because they're spending so many hours a day with them. And you become those people become very important people to young people and children. And, I just say, don't underestimate that. It's not just another kid. You might be a really significant person for that young person.
yeah, and
Okay, I'll
I
stop.
always no, I can see Jamie too. I always find that too in those moments. because it's an assumption that they have a safe adult, even if it is a mum and dad family and it all appears fine on the outside. Don't assume that safe adult type approach to what I do, but it can give that child that motivation to keep going and that they matter, having those
Yeah.
supportive adults, especially when your closest don't have that same maternal or paternal instincts. It can be quite a lot on a child, like basically the two most important people in your world, and it's like no. But having other adults that aren't even your family show that interest in a positive and supportive way can really help, I find, in guiding these children that what else is out there, what, like, this doesn't have to always be my life, like there's another other type, because you don't always see healthy relationships either, like you might think that's just it for the next 50, 70, 80 years, like so having those outside, like I've noted down to those outside your family circle relationships just help broaden that. I guess the ideal, if you can make what you want your own future life and relationships to be.
Mm. It's very interesting looking back at these memories. I wasn't actually prepared with all
Oh,
the things that come back, but I like coming into Stretcher Family, I guess, Barbie, just to explain how that eventuated. So, when I was 12, I was removed from my family through a life of abuse and stuff, right? So then I moved from Sydney to Matraville, which is, for national listeners, the eastern suburbs of Sydney. And I was with my grandparents. And for whatever reason, there was a whole bunch of stuff that occurred. And my grandparents said, right before my 14th birthday, I was 13, and they said, if you don't find, to the Department of Community Services docs at that point, if you don't find a place for Jamie this afternoon, he's on the street. And so that's where docs then picked me up from school, from high school, and took me to their office. And then they had to try and work out where I was going to live. And I remember to this day still sitting in that lobby as the caseworkers or whoever they were out trying to phone people. And I went into a crisis care service called Gateway, which is in Leichhardt. And then that was a place I was with for a couple of weeks. And then that's where I then went to Stretcher Family. I think there was like 2 visits that I had to see if it was the right fit or something like that. But I do remember that building so well. I remember that is where people would work, and there would be an office space, but then there would be a residential space where there would be bedrooms and all those things, and there would be youth workers that would go on a rotating shift. But I think, Narelle, what I remember is, and maybe there was things that happened behind the scenes as a young person who just lived there, right?
mm,
And I think in centres, in childcare spaces, you don't always see what happens in the background. But I do always remember kindness. I always remember a bit of patience, and not just myself, but the other kids. We're all going through our own stuff. Like, it was hard. It was not easy, and I don't think I ever coined a depression or an anxiety response in that moment of time. But I do think there was a lot of complexity, even my own self identity working through that. But, you touched on Lillian, and, I've also gone down a pathway of leadership over the years as well. And I'd love for you to explain to the listeners about Lillian, who was the CEO of Fletcher Family. Tell us a bit about her.
So I'll just touch on something you just said. I think you said kindness, and I think the culture of a place like that, or in early childhood, or in any office setting, or whatever it is, the culture of a place is largely set by its leader. And Lillian is a person, she's still around, is a person who is extremely kind and passionate. If you saw her, you wouldn't think that she was the force to be reckoned with, that she was. She's a very short Maltese woman. She came here at the age of 17 on a boat, and got married at 17 and had 4 children pretty quickly. And she went to uni a bit later, after the kids got a bit older. And her first job was as the CEO of this organisation, which was about to close down because of funding, and she resurrected it through a lot of hard work. But I remember we used to have meetings every week called casework meetings with the youth workers, and we'd talk about all the kids and what was happening for them and what needed to happen. And I remember a couple of the youth workers at one point complaining about some of the kids being too difficult, and thought it wasn't Jamie. I mean, he was never that difficult.
I was
Other kids. But they were complaining about a couple of kids that were really, and they were really difficult. They were challenging in their behaviours. And I just remember Lillian listening and thinking, what's going through her head? And when it was the person finished, she said, if it's too hot in the kitchen, then you can get out because we're here for the kids. I've got goosebumps when I say that. And that set the scene for, there was a lot of care for staff and a lot of support for staff. And there were some incidents that happened where staff needed a lot of support, but essentially we were there for the kids. And if it was too hard for you, then look somewhere else for your job. And she was there for 20 years and she did a lot of hard stuff. And she was someone that allowed you to develop and make mistakes. And she would listen. I remember once having a little bit of an issue with her because we had a foster carer that didn't want to deal with me and I was the caseworker, so he kept ringing Lillian. And of course she's so kind, so she would answer and take it. And I reproached her and said, you're undermining me. This didn't happen really quickly. You're undermining me by allowing him to go to you. And she just took that on. And the next time he rang, she said, you need to speak to Narelle. She's the caseworker. So she was incredibly supportive. And I think that's why I stayed there for 10 years. I left for 2 and then I came back for 5 in management. And other people stayed a long time as well. So I think, like I said, the culture of a place is set by the leader, and she taught me a lot about leadership and firmness and kindness, and regardless of the kindness, doing what is supposed to be done at a very high level. So, yeah, it wasn't a hard place to work in terms of colleagues and culture. It was a hard place in terms of what the kids went through at times. Yeah.
I know at the start, sorry Jay, I feel like for anyone listening, I know we've been talking about your relationship, but before we recorded, when I mentioned the talking about the relationship, Jamie was like, no, we can talk about Narelle's time overseas as well. I'm not sure if you, because you mentioned there how you had worked there but left for 2 years and came back, whether, because I think it's fascinating what you've done. And again, you're very similar to Jamie for me as an outsider on the playing it down, like, nah, there was nothing. But did you want to talk a little bit, or do you mind sharing a little bit about your time? And I feel bad about Malawi. Did I say it right that time? Malawi.
Yeah.
And I made sure I looked it up before talking. It's like we've all heard about it, but when you try and picture where it is or anything, it's like really small, tiny. I was about to say country, but I'm not sure what they call each. Do they call them all little countries?
Yes, it's a country. It's one. I think Africa has about 51 or 52 countries in it. I'm not sure how many.
This shows that I used to be a teacher and have not looked at maps in a long time. No, I didn't want to call it state or country and get it all wrong. No, and it's tiny. Like, I think twice the size of Tasmania, but population-wise isn't much less than the whole of Australia and one of the poorest countries in the world. That I'm aware of. But for yourself, is it 11 years you spent there?
Yeah. So just to pick up what you just said, Malawi fits into Australia 65 times.
Wow.
Okay, so it is very small. It's twice the size of Tassie. That's it. So 65 times, and yet the population of Australia at the moment, I think it's about 26 million, 26 point something.
Yeah.
Yeah. The population of Malawi is 21 million.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people, and 80% of those people are subsistence farmers, which means that they grow food for themselves and they don't have enough to sell or anything. And so what they eat, they grow pretty much.
Wow.
So it's a country of tremendous poverty, despite the billions that have been poured into it over the years. There's a lot of reasons for that in a lot of countries. It doesn't have a lot of infrastructure. And I signed up to go there for 2 years in 2010. Maths have never been my big subject, so I stayed for 11. I don't know, somehow I just forgot to come back. I was meant to come back after 10, but and I finished my job and was ready to come in a couple of weeks, and the airport closed in 2020 because of COVID. So I was there for another year without a job or a car or anywhere to live, but that was a good year. Um, but it was an amazing look. It was, I'd say, life there for me was very simple and uncomplicated, and often very, very inconvenient because you don't have the resources that you've got here. Um, for example, the president of Mozambique and the president of Malawi had a falling out. Malawi's landlocked, so anything that comes in from boats comes across Mozambique. And so we didn't have petrol for about 2.5 years, and we'd have to buy it on the black market. And I'd go to work at 8 o'clock and I'd say to the driver who was employed there, "Here are my keys. Can you find me fuel? I have to leave at 4 today." And off he'd go at 8 o'clock and try to find fuel. So it was often very inconvenient. But the fact that I kept renewing after every 2 years indicates that there was something that drew me to it.
Okay, so can we go right to the beginning? So you're with the Salvation Army,
Yeah.
and you still are with the Salvation Army.
Yeah, the Salvation Army is my church. I grew up going to the Salvation Army, and I decided I wanted to work in a developing country simply because I could. I was available,
Yeah.
and I'd done a few holidays. I had visited a few developing countries, Papua New Guinea, and gone up around, and I was very comfortable. And so I thought I'd like to do that. I don't want to sort of get to the end of my life and think, well, I had a mortgage and worked 9 to 5. I want to do something a little bit more adventurous. I can't say it was altruistic. It was more, just something I wanted to do. And I wasn't looking at the Salvation Army, even though that's my tribe, because I wanted to be paid. So I looked at lots of other organisations, World Vision and Tear Fund and Oxfam and a few other things. But most of them needed, unless it was an entry-level job, and I was already in my late 40s, then you needed to have about between 6 and 10 years experience to get a job in the management positions. So I just had this epiphany one day. I was like, I think I was 48 and it was November, and I thought, my goodness, I'm going to be 49 next year. When am I going to do it? And the reason that I hadn't done it was there was always, like at Stretch Your Family, there was like, I'd be saying, I'll just get this kid through school, or I'll just got to this kid settled in foster care, or, I just get, when I worked for another organisation, I'll just finish this task. And so there was always something. And then, of course, I had Kimber, who was by then elderly, and I thought, I can't go. I simply can't go while she's around. So it was just after she passed away, and I thought, I can go. And I contacted the Salvation Army in November. January, I got a letter from the international office in London to say, we'd like you to go to Malawi. And my first reaction was, where is that? I'd never heard of it. I didn't even know it was in Africa.
Yeah, wow.
So it wasn't like I chose to go to Malawi. I put in the application and said, I'll go anywhere. And that's where I ended up.
So when you did some research and understood where Malawi was, because you would have had to do something, because you would have been like, I'm getting on a plane somewhere, and you started educating yourself more of the country, what were your first initial reactions of learning about the country?
I don't remember doing much of that, to be honest. There was a lot of organising to get there, selling my stuff. And it was a 2-year contract, but I thought I'd be there for 4, because I thought packing up my life here 2 years would go really quickly. I was going to a new culture. I was going to a completely different job. But there was a couple there from England who were running the Salvation Army at the time. They left just before I got there, but they sent me lots of information via emails, just things like she would just write me emails about who her contacts were, her doctors, where she shopped at the market, introduced me to some people, and just gave me some general advice. I don't know that I don't recall doing much research about the country. That's a bit slack, isn't it?
No, so you flew there, obviously, unless you got
Yes.
a canoe.
It's too far to swim.
And you got off the plane. What were your first immediate reactions of getting to?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. So I wore a Salvation Army shirt because they didn't know me. And when you get off the plane, you get off onto the tarmac, and there was a viewing area, an open veranda, and it was a small airport. It was like a small regional airport in Australia, but it was the international airport of Blantyre, which is one of the three cities. There's only three cities. And there was I think there was 4 Salvation Army ministers or officers, as we call them. They were dressed in their uniform. So as soon as I walked out, I saw them. So I knew they were there for me. So I just waved and they waved to me. And I was nervous. When I left on the plane, I thought, I'm not back here for 2 years. And there was some sadness in that, especially because my mother was elderly. She was already she was in her late 70s. That's not elderly, sorry. But so, then I remember the drive, and I remember the drive from the airport to where I was going to be staying. And I remember seeing lots of different people along the road selling things like selling cobs of corn or selling, peanuts and it hit me. I thought, oh my goodness, I have been to developing countries, I have been to poor countries, but I'm going to live here. I'm not here as a tourist and going home. I'm going to live there. And I did have the thought, will I be able to cope? Because it was in your face, beggars everywhere. It was just in your face all the time. So I did have an initial thought of, I don't know if I can do this. And for the first couple of weeks, so I had dinner with the neighbours. They were Malawians and very different culture to ours. And they didn't laugh at my jokes. I mean, can you imagine? How can that happen? But I remember it was about 2 weeks before I saw a white person, and I was going to the shops, but I hadn't seen a white person for 2 weeks. And I thought, where are they? Where are the expats? Because I was that's something I should say, I was the only white person in the whole Salvation Army, in the whole country, for the whole 11 years. That was it.
You know what? If you flip and reverse it a little bit, that was what people with darker colour skin would be feeling almost every day.
Yes.
How
yes.
interesting. And what did that feel like, being the minority in a country where your skin tone isn't the same?
Well, at work, it was very prominent. And at first, they treated me like the queen, which was not good. It was hard to be vulnerable and real. And I started going to a local Salvation Army church, and I was the only white person. And I don't have a problem with that. I was there to enjoy the culture.
Yeah.
But because they treated me as, I was the head of the department and I was white. The way they treated me changed, I must say. So it all got very normal after that. But I just thought, I need to meet some expats. I need to meet some people who are on my wavelength. And I became good friends with the Salvation Army family, who I'm still very good friends with. In fact, one of them is coming in November to stay with me.
Oh, wow.
And so, I had some great relationships with my Malawian friends, but I did need to find the expat community, which I did. Yeah.
So it's kind of like finding your tribe around a bit of chaos and finding your kind of people and your community or your safe people. It's actually really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And look, one of my closest friends, Dorica Tolombalombo, which I took a few weeks to learn to say, Dorica Talitha Kanani Tolombalombo, is her full name. She will never hear this, so I can say it. She's a single woman, which is unusual in Malawi. She's chosen to be single for some personal reasons, and that's tough for her. But I've just lost my train of thought. It was going to be really interesting too.
So I guess my next question to you, Narelle, is what that's amazing. Like, I can really imagine, Barbie. I don't know if you like really there with the like what is it that you did when you were there? Like, what was your day-to-day life? Like, what were your responsibilities? Like, you worked for the Salvation Army, obviously, but like for those who don't really get it yet,
Yeah.
What did you actually do?
Well, the department was called Projects and Development Department. And so I was the head of the department. It was largely an administrative role. But what I came to learn as time went on was really my role was to support and equip the Malawian managers to implement the program. So we had a lot of projects around the country. When I got there, we had Oh, look, it's radio, so I can't use my hand. A podcast, I can't use my hands. But we had a lot of projects, and I think we did them um, at a fairly shallow level. And so as I got to know my staff and time went on and starting to talk to them, we decided to reduce the number of projects we had, and we identified 4 areas that we were good at, and we concentrated on those areas. So that was child trafficking. We didn't do the child trafficking. We helped kids who'd been trafficked. And we were the only organisation in the country that had a residential facility for young people who'd been trafficked under the age of 18. And we would get them back to their families. So that was that. We had agriculture programs, which included water and sanitation and hygiene, bringing water into communities that didn't have water and had to walk kilometres to find puddles and things. So agriculture and WASH, water hygiene, and orphans and vulnerable children. So I guess that took me a little bit back to my former work in Australia, except that these households were headed by teenagers. So both parents had died. You might have a 14-year-old looking after a number of younger kids, and the poverty was extreme, extreme. And so we did a pilot project with 30 households of orphans that were chosen by the chiefs in the village. And we worked with those households to help them grow capacity in their own lives through work and resources, and hopefully give them a bit of a step up. I don't know what else you want to hear, because I could talk for hours about Malawi.
I have to admit, it doesn't. I was going to use my language one. It makes you feel bad when you reflect on anything I've thought about my day so far that I've been annoyed with, if this makes sense. Like, say, I went
Yeah,
to cook my lunch but didn't turn the oven on properly, so I
that
had to
is
wait 20
annoying.
minutes. But
Yeah,
in like reflecting on, like, oh gosh, like, it's always a good reminder of how good we have it, and not forgetting that, because sometimes we can be like myself. I don't watch a lot of news. I've got young kids. I've
mm,
got ADHD. I just don't have the executive
yeah,
functioning to do it all at once. So I miss a lot of what's actually happening in the world, and you can feel disconnected. And it's not like, for someone like yourself, though, I was about to say, it's not like we can all change everything, although you've gone and done a big impact. But in a sense of making sure we that gratitude is the word I was looking for. That was what I was
yeah,
thinking of. Especially after this, I know when I go to eat my lunch, I forgot to cook earlier. Like, just being more mindful and grateful of, like, I've got the opportunity to do this. I can do this. I have food. Like, I have a job. I have a safe roof over my head.
yes. Look, I totally agree. And, 11 years is a long time. And I remember thinking when I come home, when I was preparing to come home, I hope I keep the values that I've learnt here. And it's a bit like swimming upstream. I wanted to keep those values, but I started thinking about the sort of car I'd get. Things like
Oh,
that. But I think for me, um, I'm constantly reminded, or I'm regularly reminded, because I've still got contacts there. I've got expat friends that work there, but more importantly, I've got Malawian friends. And so Dorica, a couple of months ago, she has never done this in all the years I've known her. She's got the care of several kids. She's always had nieces and nephews in her care. Um, but because she's single, she only gets an allowance from the Salvation Army for a single person. So she struggles. But she sent me a text and said, "Hey, Narelle, um, I've got no money, and we don't have any food in the house." And I just, it was so sad, that that's her everyday struggle, and that's the reality for so many people around the world. And we have it so good here, and it's not the fault of young people and children here that sometimes they take that for granted, because that's the society we live in. But we can do a lot to help kids to understand and to appreciate the lives of other people as
mm.
well.
And without feeling guilty, I guess, too. That's where I
Yeah,
like.
yeah, that's right. And look, I think it's about generosity and kindness. I think of some of the entrepreneurs around the world. I won't name them, but the mega millionaires, and a lot of them do a lot for other people. And some people would say, well, so they should, and I think they should too. But they do it. And I think it doesn't matter who we are or how little we have. It doesn't matter how little I have. I am rich in comparison. And I'm talking financially rich. There's a lot of ways to be rich. But in Malawi, they are relationally rich. And they're the things that I picked up, the families. And I remember Dorica's family, one of the sisters was not living a life that was good for her. And so the whole family, including mum and dad, travelled from everywhere to sit together. I was there, but I didn't understand anything because it was in their language and I was just outside. But they were there to discuss with her life and what needed to change. Whereas I think about my own family and I think they wouldn't have a clue what I do or where I am or what I'm struggling with. So they are rich in relationship. And that's something I really learnt, can I say a bit more?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things I really learnt there was, I'd get to work and park outside and I'd get my bag and the guard would come because everyone's got a guard. The guard from the office would come and want to take my bag. And my thought was, oh no, you're not my servant. I don't want you to carry my bag. And I'd say, no, no, no. And I'd walk in with it and I'd just, people would say hello and I'd say, hello, how are you? And keep walking. That was not okay. And Dorica pointed it out to me. She said to me one day, you have to let them carry your bag. That's what they want to do. It's their job. You're taking their task away from them. They want to do it. But more importantly than that, and
Yeah.
we talked as we walked, more importantly with that is I learnt that I needed to take 10 or 15 minutes from the car park to my office because you stop and say, good morning, how are you? And they answer, how is home? They answer, they ask you how is home, and you have that conversation. And I remember this coming home to me so clearly when Dorica and I were leaving, visiting a friend of mine in a compound, and I got to the gate and I went to open the gate and she wasn't with me. And I turned around and she was back at the guardhouse talking and laughing and, just having a great chat. So I waited and she came to me and I said, oh, do you know those people? She said, no, I don't know them, but you can't walk past without greeting them.
Mm.
And that really impacted me. So consequently, a lot of people, whether they want it or not, I say hello to them when I walk on the street because that's just what I learned to do.
I noted down, I just wanted to double check, when you started talking about it, you mentioned something how life was very simple, uncomplicated, and very, very, very inconvenient. Does that relational side, do you think, play into that feeling of being simple and uncomplicated?
Yeah. Yes, I do because my whole entertainment, or whether you're an expat or not, was about just being together. It wasn't about it. There wasn't anything to do in Malawi. I mean, they had a musical society that put on a performance once a year, and the whole expat community went because it was, the cultural event of the year.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even that good. But and the schools put on musicals and plays, so we'd all go to that. Everyone would turn up, so you knew everyone. But mostly, you just hung out at people's places, and one of the things I loved doing, I had a four-wheel drive ute, and I would just pile Dorica and her family, and that's like, it can be 20 people, but I'd pile as many as I could into the ute, and we'd drive for an hour and a half, and I'd just take chicken and bread rolls, and they'd bring, some drinks, and we'd just sit around at a waterfall on some rocks, and the kids would play for hours, and we'd eat chicken and bread rolls, and we spent the whole day doing that, and that was awesome. So, yeah, I think the relationships were really very, very important. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many interesting little gems, Narelle, as you're sharing. And, I think for our listeners, especially educators, I don't know, it's interesting. Like, I know for myself, to your point, Barbie, most mornings I would do a walk on the beach. And I think we are very privileged in Australia for a variety of reasons. And I do think I think the downside of Australia, while we have so many opportunities, is that we do live in a society where I feel like it's always we need to be busy. We always need to do
Mm-hmm.
something. And, I know in early childhood, the culture can be quite toxic and it can be really hard to lose focus on what is important about why we do what we do. And it's not just about having, hopefully, it's not just about having a job and getting a paycheck, which is, of course, an important foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? But it's also about how can we shift the mindset to have this mindset of showing gratitude and appreciation, and the fact that children from 6 weeks to 5 year olds, or outside of school hours care going into traditional schooling where, let's be honest, that's not the right fit for all children, and being able to go, what is my purpose and why am I here today? And I think, Narelle, your story about a country that has, what is it, the population of Australia inside the size of a Tasmania,
Yeah, double Tasmania.
Yeah.
like, that's wild. And I just think I think for Australians, that's an extreme. And I don't know if everyone's going on to, you know, travel.com or whatever and go, let's have a 2 week holiday in Malawi.
Good. They've got some great game parks.
Oh, I reckon it would be. I would be down for that. But I think it is really fascinating to hear that you had an option to be there for 2 years, but you were there for a long period of time. If you were to summarize some of your takeaways of how that shaped you as a human being, what would you say that would have been?
I think two things. Well, first, I'd say that I think when you're in a small expat community, you make friends quickly and deeply, much more than Australia, because I was never lonely in Malawi because everyone's in the same boat. Even if there's a couple and they've got a family of kids. So I had some friends, husband and wife, and they had 2 kids when I got there and 4 kids when I left. And but they didn't have their aunts and uncles or grandparents. So you were the ones that got invited to everything. So you do make those friendships quickly. And they're interesting people usually who work in in these countries. What was your question, Jamie?
I wrote it. Oh
Yeah,
yeah, sorry. You
what
probably
was it?
remember.
No, my question was, what was the
Oh, the
biggest
takeaway.
takeaways you had? As you reflect back in your time at Malawi,
Yeah,
that has shaped
yeah.
you.
Look, I think the main ones for me, and I don't always succeed, is patience and not to get like, driving on the road, let people in, it doesn't matter, and so often people just speed up so you can't get in. And I'm thinking, what's that about?
Yeah.
Things like sitting with people and taking the time. So some of the takeaways for me was I never want to say to someone, I'm too busy. You know, you might have a lot to do, but I don't want to be too busy for people. And I guess the other thing I took away, the two more things was one was about just sitting with people, and I think of little kids, and I remember Jamie lots of times. I remember sitting outside my office with
Yes.
you on the concrete footpath. We would sit on the footpath and just lean up against the wall and we'd talk. And I think, for your listeners, that is so important, just to sit with people, with kids, with young people, with their parents. Just sit and listen. You don't have to talk, just listen. Um, I can't stress that enough. I don't think we understand the significance of that. The other thing for me is simplicity. I try really hard, or minimalism. I live in a lovely home. I want for nothing. But I remember when I got home, two of my relatives said to me, "You have to get an air fryer." I said, "No, I don't." And they said, "No, no, you really do. You have to get an air fryer." No. And lots of people said it because they were the new thing. And I thought, do I have to get an air fryer? So I looked them up, and I didn't want lots of stuff. And I didn't want lots of stuff on my kitchen bench. I just wanted it to be simple. So that's something I have maintained. Um, I do drive a nice car, but that's because work has given it to me. But yeah, I just try. I just try things like that. Things like fashion is not that important to me because it never was in Malawi. Um, I did change t-shirts to talk to you today,
Oh,
but
we thank you.
well, the other one had holes in it. So yeah, things like that: simplicity, minimalism, patience, and being with people. And again, I say I don't achieve all those things all the time, but they are values that I have.
I think there's a lot of lessons there learnt that
Mm.
educators in the classroom, or even in outside of school hours care settings, wherever the setting is, if it's in a shared
Yeah.
or whatever, could actually take on board as well, because we live in
Mm.
a society of, technology and apps and communication and la 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 la, that we forget the importance of actually being present and in the
Yeah.
moment, being there for the
And
other.
with your colleagues as well, with
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
That's something I really found hard when I came back to from Malawi to Australia, was everyone texts to each other. And I was like, why doesn't anyone just ring me?
I
And
totally.
so we'd be texting back and forth, back and forth, back. And then I'd pick up the phone and say, I thought it'd be quicker to ring.
I am such a phone person. Like, I even say to everybody, don't email me. That's just an update. That
Yeah.
is not a communication form. I'm going to call you. And first, that actually felt really uncomfortable for people. But I'm like, everyone, we've lost the art of actually talking and speaking,
Yes.
and being able to, because sometimes you can read a message and you might have a crappy day or a bad day, and you read those words with the same emotions or feeling, and it's like you're losing the context of actually that connection and the tone of language.
Yeah. And if you think about, people, I mean, I have a border now, but I've lived on my own for a long time. So if people don't ring me, I could go all day without hearing a human voice.
Yeah.
Or if
Mm.
someone's feeling down or they're having a bad day, it's nice to get a phone call. So just little things like that. It's sort of, it's the old world, but there are a lot of good things in that world.
Well, we've evolved for I believe that reason we are like a social species. Like
Hmm.
we're one that wants that side. I'm really bad at verbatim. There's an upcoming guest, I believe, that will talk about that. A professor of neuroscience, but it was just like, yeah, we're that social species. And then even I don't have social media on my phone, and most people think I'm weird, but it's like it
Good.
distracts you from whatever's around you. I have ADHD. That was my main reason for getting it off, but it
Yeah.
changes your relationship with your children. And I noticed, even though it's me not using my phone as much, but I'm not as, this is when my mum had, as irritable with the children, because it must be you think you're on it for 2 seconds, but you're taking in more information. Your child asks you for something, and you might be like, "Hang on, wait." Whereas not doing that, your patience is different because your brain's not in 50,000 places at once,
Yeah.
um, and it's already in 50,000 places when you have ADHD. But it's the simplicity side. I've been looking at from a personal lens, the minimalist side, plus with children, and we probably would not probably, I know we do this in the classroom, whether in early learning or out of school hours care. It's like what we put in place that we think might be making everything easier can sometimes actually be making it harder. I know my Mr. 3 has a lot of energy, but often he just wants to sit down with a book with someone next to him and not even talking to him, like an adult. But I can take the cues from him of he has energy because he's running around like crazy, but it's actually his body just needs to relax. But he's 3 and doesn't know how to go and do it very well. And even if we look in our routines of what we're doing with children, like it's great to have all that active play, but what about the passive play and opportunities? But the passive opportunities with the educators, I think we think of a lot of the active opportunities with educators, but not necessarily the passive. Like there's do they still call it the home corner? Like the pretend play and everything. But what about when you were talking, Narelle and Jamie, of you just sitting on the concrete, leaning against the wall? Like if educators are listening, like when did they last do that with a child, but in a passive sense as well, um, with no goal or intention?
It's actually, well, I agree, but I do remember a conversation with you, Narelle, outside
Yeah.
your office on the concrete, and it's actually stuck with me. I still think about it to this day. And I remember you said to me, "Look across the street and tell me what you see." And I explained all the things that I saw, and then you said to me, "Well, can I tell you what I saw?" And it was actually very different. And I think the lesson you're trying to teach me was about perspective. Um,
Mm.
It was. I remember the situation actually.
yeah, yeah, and I I actually, it's interesting because it is sometimes about that two people can see the same thing, but being able to see a different aspect of the same thing is something where sitting down with you and actually talking through that in a way that you challenged my way of thinking, I was able to explain what I saw, and being 14 or whatever, I didn't actually agree, but I, I still to this day think about that when I'm leading teams. That I might
Yeah.
have a way of thinking, but it's not always the right way. I think I don't know.
Yeah, look, I remember that conversation. I remember the situation too. I don't know if you do, but something had happened at school with a teacher, and what you said and what the teacher said was a different uh, take on the situation. And I remember thinking, I remember trying to help you understand that you could both be right,
Hmm.
that she didn't have to be wrong, you didn't have to be wrong, you could both be right. And that's what you've just said about a different perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've got a photo to show you,
Oh no.
and
I hope I haven't got a perm.
it's not of you, it's of myself
Oh,
actually.
excellent.
It actually is interesting that this photo came back into my life because my cousins who live overseas came to Sydney when I was living at Stretcher Family, and
Oh.
they I don't know how they found this photo, and I don't have any photos of my childhood except for one baby photo, and yeah, it's
Is that you?
yes, it is.
Oh, that's, yeah, I can. Oh,
Is that a
yeah.
boulder?
Can
It's
you
a
send
folder.
that to me?
I
Yeah.
will
Is
send it
it?
to you.
I can't see if it's like a bolt, like yeah.
Okay, I have to explain
You are
to you.
gorgeous.
It is 1994, 1995-ish, so mid-90s, and definitely rocking the hair.
Oh, you're so gorgeous, Jamie. Please send that to me.
I will
Do you
send it.
know, I remember, now, if I'm wrong on this, please correct me, but when you're a young teenager, like most like young teenage boys, you're a bit of a skinny little
A run.
kid.
So
Well, I wasn't going to say that. I think you were tall, but you were skinny and you weren't, you know. And I remember
it's true.
having not seen you for well over 10 years. Some years ago, we met in Newtown
That's right. Yeah.
and you walked towards me with this big beard and you're a big, muscular guy. And, and I had to reach up to give you a hug. And I couldn't believe it. And what was so amazing was he was this man who I had known as a kid, and you took me out to dinner. It was one of the greatest moments, my experience, one of my greatest experiences, that this little young boy that I worked with was now a man who took me out to dinner. I've got tears in my eyes. It was just so special. And I remember we didn't need any more food, but we needed somewhere else to go. So we went and sat at the back of the bookshop and pretended we were reading books.
It was really my way of saying thank you for who you are as a human being. And I honestly, Narelle, we are so appreciative of you being on today's podcast. And
Thank you.
really, I don't know, Barbie, I felt this has been not just therapeutic, but also for our listeners to be able to listen. That I really hope, as we're thinking about inviting guests onto this podcast, it's not just about people who work in a classroom or influence directly in our sector, but actually some people across a variety of different sectors to still have some weaves of professional learnings and moments of reflection that maybe we could look inwardly, because this podcast is created for the listeners, and we're hoping we can bring lots of amazing humans onto this podcast. And Narelle, thank you so much for being here. But before we wrap up today, I'm going to hand you over to Barbie with our final question on the podcast.
Yes, we tend to ask this question that has nothing to do with whatever we spoke about, and we kind of do that for a reason. It can let you lend the podcast, even if it's good or everything, on a different note. But do you remember what? Because most people always seem to try and find it. What was the first live performance you went to? Now, this could be, we started off with this meaning a musical gig or theatre or movie, or yeah, it looks like I can tell you've got it, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
now this fits in well with the theme of the podcast in other people being important in a child's life. My next door neighbours, who were a young married couple at the time in their 20s, and I was about 8 or 7, they took me to see Fiddler on the Roof, and
Oh,
I loved it. But I think what I loved was I went out with these adults. They took
Yeah.
me out to see that. So that was Yeah, and I love Fiddler on the Roof, and I think I love it because I went with them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what you associated with and where it came
yeah.
from.
And they weren't relatives, they were just a young couple who lived next door to mum and dad.
Do you know, Barbie, what we need to do is we need to get a blackboard and we need to kind of put a table of who, because we've had a couple of musicals thus far. We've had people who've seen live gigs, we've had people who don't like music at all and they've gone to a play. So this question's actually evolved so many times. But gosh, thank you so much, Narelle, for our time together.
Oh,
And
thank you, Jamie. It's just been an absolute honour and really enjoyable. Thank you.
all right, till next time, Barbie. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Bold Blueprint.
If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach out to us on
elm.net.au or
fireflyhr.com.au.
Bye.
Bye.